You're listening to international investment advisor Doug Goldstein on the Goldstein on Gelt show, the financial show where we'll talk about how you can make the most of your money. With all the confusing financial chatter bombarding you each and every day, Goldstein on Gelt will give you the practical information you want and need about living a financially stable life. Here's your host, money maven Doug Goldstein.
Okay, we are back. I'm very happy to have on the Goldstein on Gelt show Doug Shadel, who's the director of the AARP in the state of Washington, and he's a leading expert on fraud schemes in the elderly. Doug, it's a real pleasure to have you.
My pleasure to be here.
Before I go into a number of the questions I have about what sort of cons there are against the elderly, can you just give us the 30-second summary of what is the AARP and what do you do?
Well, I'm a state director for a particular state, the state of Washington. AARP is an organization that serves people over the age of 50. We have 38 million members throughout the United States, including about 1 million in Washington state, here where I live.
Okay, so what you focus on is fraud and cons. What are the most common cons that are happening today?
Well, some have been happening for a long time and continue to happen today, like one that we've been focusing on a lot recently, are foreign lottery frauds, especially coming out of the Caribbean and especially Jamaica. There have been a number of news stories. There was a congressional hearing last month about this. And, lottery scams, what's a lottery scam? Somebody will write to you or call you and tell you that you've won the El Gordo lottery or the Jamaican lottery. And in order to collect your winnings, all you have to do is pay a legal fee or a processing fee of $29 or $300 or it changes. Mm-hmm. And you send the money, and as soon as you send that money or you respond in writing, you start getting bombarded by calls. And I'm talking about 40 or 50 calls a day.
Oh my gosh. From
young aggressive males who will just not take no for an answer. And they'll be very charming at first, but what you discover is that there really is no Jamaican lottery, or that you really haven't won the lottery. And it's not uncommon to see people lose anywhere from, as little as $300 to $300,000.
Oh my God.
And part of the question, people say, well, why do they keep, after you find out you haven't won, why do people keep sending money? Part of it is they're just so intimidating. They're afraid. I mean, we've had examples where people, these guys will call and leave voicemail messages saying, if you don't pick up the phone, I'm going to come and burn your house down.
Oh, my gosh.
So threats of physical violence. But the other psychological thing that happens is once you've lost a bunch of money, you are confronted with this conflict, right? I'm a smart person and I did something that wasn't so smart. How do you resolve that conflict? You either say, I'm not a smart person, which is hard to do, or you say, what I did really wasn't dumb, and I'm going to keep doing it until I prove to the world that I really did win the lottery. And it's sort of we call it the rationalization trap. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people are falling for this.
It's very interesting. I also get these emails from time to time and realize that I never bought a lottery ticket and therefore I couldn't win. But my day job is that I'm an investment advisor, and occasionally I send out warnings to my clients about such things. But one day I got a call from a client, and he said, Doug, I need the instructions to wire money to my account because I just won the South African lottery. And I said, are you South African? He said, no. I said, did you buy a ticket? He said, no. I said, did you really think you won? And he, he really thought he won. He thought I was being a little bit silly until we spent some time discussing it. Why is it that people, this quite frankly seems a little bit blatant. Why would someone believe he won the lottery?
Yeah. Well, there's a couple. We don't know for certain. There's more research that needs to be done, but I've done a lot of research on lottery victims and investment fraud victims for that matter. One of the things we did about 3 years ago was identified 45 people who'd fallen for the lottery. We sent geriatric social workers into their homes to do mental status evaluations of them. The clock, draw a clock, what time is it, count backwards from 7. And these are people who know how to do this. And they found that 80% of the victims had some form of cognitive impairment, which is a much higher rate than the general population. So that may be one thing that's going on. There's also, in these really around the world now, this sort of global sweepstakes mentality we've interviewed a lot of con men who did these types of scams. And one of the things they say is, if it weren't for, 48 states in the United States promoting the lottery, we could never pull this scam off. Because it's legitimate. There are legitimate, and they're promoting, and there's millions of dollars being spent promoting sweepstakes. And so it's in that environment, that cultural environment, that people tend to believe it, when you and I might not. The other thing that the con men say, I just wanted to add this, when we ask them the question, what is your central strategy for swindling people, just across all different kinds of scams, they all say the same thing, and that is, I want to get the victim under the ether. And we say, well, what do you mean by ether? Mm-hmm. Ether is a heightened emotional state where you get all excited about something, whether it's a fear of losing your money or whether it's the excitement of winning the lottery. You're no longer, your logical reasoning mind is no longer engaged, and you're reacting emotionally. They all said, one guy said, I want to keep them in the altitude of the ether, because if they drop into the valley of logic, then I've lost them. And this partly explains why we interview so many people who are doctors, lawyers, retired physicians who have lost hundreds of thousands of dollars in investment scams. And we speculate that the reason that can happen is because they're not using that really intelligent part of their brain at the moment they make the decision. They're being swamped out by the emotion of the moment. So we used to tell people, whatever you do, remember this, don't give out your credit card number over the phone to people. Mm-hmm. Now we say the principal advice is, don't engage in a personal conversation with a stranger in which you're telling them about your children and your grandchildren, and they're getting you all emotionally involved. And they're also writing all those things down so they use them against you. That's unfortunately where we are now.
Wow. We are talking with Doug Shadel, who's the director of the AARP in the state of Washington. He's a specialist in fraud schemes in the elderly. He's been explaining to us some of the reasons why people get tied up in these frauds, for example, lottery. Doug, one of the things you said is that there's the issue of cognitive impairment. So obviously you can't tell someone who has a problem, don't have the problem. But what can we do to help people like that?
I think that's really the $64,000 question here. A lot of the, we have, I can tell you about a program we operate out of my office here. It's called the Fraud Fighter Call Center. And law enforcement gives us the names of victims of fraud, but we also buy names, just like the con man does actually, of people who meet the profile. We've done profiling research of who falls for these types of scams. Wow. In the case of the lottery victim, it is someone who's over the age of 70. They tend to be female. They tend to have less, earn less than $30,000, lower education. Reach out to them. We have older volunteers, about 75 of them in the office here, who call them and give them peer counseling, and give them information.
You mean before they get hit, before they're
before and after? Because the other thing the con men will tell you is that the number one person they want to call to swindle is somebody who's already been swindled, which seems really counterintuitive.
You would think their experience would make them less vulnerable, no?
Well, they've already pulled the trigger. You would think that. Yes, you would think that. But it's this throwing good money after bad mentality. It's also a personality type of somebody who's willing to talk to a stranger and wire money across the world to someone they don't know. And so we more and more in fraud prevention work are trying to use those profiles that we get from research and the victims and focus our attention on those people and not the general public. Because the general public, we don't know what the exact prevalence rate is, but I would guess research tells us it's between 8 to 15% of the population in any given year.
Sorry, you're saying 8 to 15% actually is the victim of some sort of con?
Right. That's a U.S. figure, but we've fraud studies have been done all over the world, in the Netherlands, and there's a international crime victim study that has a prevalence rate that's about 8 to 10%. So the good news is, it's 90% of the public, or 85 to 90% of the public, don't fall for these things. The question is, which 85%?
Well,
are you one of them?
So you're dealing with this on an institutional level, and it's great. All power to you. But let's say the listeners of the Goldstein on Gelt show, and one of them says, I see it's a problem, and my father or my mother, who's getting a little older and maybe not thinking quite as clearly anymore, I'd like to help him, but of course I can't take control of his life because he's an independent person. How can people help their parents that way?
That's an excellent question, and I'm not sure I have a satisfying answer. We've done lots of focus groups of family members of people who have gotten caught up in this, trying to find out best practices, what worked, what didn't work. I can tell you one focus group I led, 12 people, all of whom had elderly parents or relatives who had fallen for one scam or another, and we're still kind of in it, or we're in it for a long time. And I said, what success can you point to get them out of this? And 11 of the 12 of them said, I can tell you what didn't work. I can't tell you what did work because they're still doing it. What they told us universally does not work when you approach a relative who you are worried about because they may be doing this, is to say, Mom, Dad, how could you be so stupid? This is such an obvious scam. All of them did that because that is the natural human thing. You're on the outside looking at this and you go, come on, you really, the Jamaican lottery? I mean, come on. But the problem with that approach is that the defense shields go up. They continue to do it, only they're doing it behind your back. It creates all kinds of family tension. The one example of a person who did it successfully was someone who literally said, I'm interested in this stuff you're doing with the sweepstakes and so forth. How about if every day when the mail comes, you and I can talk about this together and you can show me, I want to learn about it, right? And this individual had the time to do that. That's a barrier for some of us. But given the time, his approach was collaborative and supportive. He even helped her mail checks in, knowing it was a scam. But through the course of several weeks of conversation, non-judgmental conversation, the victim finally said, you know what? I've never won any money. Maybe this is not a good idea. And finally sort of talked herself into it. So that's all I can offer in the way of a tactic, other than the caregivers, people who are doing this caregiving, to have things to watch for, that your family member may be doing this, because there are some warning signs. One is getting a lot of mail. If you send in one of those flyers, just one, you're going to start getting 20 letters a day, 30 letters a day, and lots of phone calls. And so look for whether there's a lot of mail coming in, whether your loved one seems to not want to talk about money, because on some level they know that this is something that they're at the very least worried about. And so if they all of a sudden, they were very communicative before and now they're sort of keeping things from you, that's another warning sign. It also tends to make them very anxious in general. Whenever the phone rings, they jump to answer it. So there are some warning signs like that. And we have some of this information on our website at www.aarp.org. You can just enter keyword scams and there's all kinds of tips on there. And anybody around the world obviously can go onto that website and get some of our tips.
All right. And you've also written a lot about this. We're just about out of time, Doug, but tell me the last few seconds, how can people actually follow some of your work itself?
Well, there is a book that I wrote last year, which was a compendium of interviews with con men. It's called Outsmarting the Scam Artists. And, you can get that on Amazon or any other book outlet. It's called Outsmarting the Scam Artists. How to protect yourself from the most clever cons. And so and in that book, there's also a vulnerability quiz that you can take or give to your loved ones to see whether they're doing things that make them vulnerable.
Okay, I think I would certainly recommend everyone read the book. And Doug, I'd like to thank you very much for your time. We've been talking to Doug Shadel, who's the director of the Washington AARP. Thanks very much.
My pleasure.
You've been listening to the Goldstein on Gelt Show with money maven Doug Goldstein. Doug's weekly radio show is heard around the world, but if you miss it, you can download the podcast at www.goldsteinongelt.com. The Goldstein on Gelt Show gives you up-to-date financial ideas so you can get on the path to financial freedom. If you'd like your questions answered on the air or off, send Doug an email to doug@profile-financial.com. It's your money for your future, so join Doug every week to build your wealth on the Goldstein on Gelt Show.